Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos-Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with co-host Mario Ramos-Reyes. Our good friend Christopher Zehnder, a fellow member of the American Solidarity Party, is with us once again, for which we are very thankful. Today, we will discuss Senator Marco Rubio's recent speech at the Catholic University of America on common good capitalism. And we're in debt to Mario Ramos-Reyes for doing some digging around on this speech and also for putting out there for consideration the question of whether or not we shouldn't invite Senator Rubio to join the American Solidarity Party. Let's begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful, and the same Spirit help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In listening to, because it's available online, Senator Rubio's presentation just, 10 days ago or so at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. One of the themes that was very much emphasized was the importance of dignified work. We often speak of human dignity. Oftentimes we speak of it in terms of what are its sources. But if we have dignity, then it ought to extend to work. So what is dignified work? Mario, you want to get us started?
Well, good morning, friends. The first impression that I got after listening the talk about common good capitalism is a instinct reaction, which is my view that these two terms seem to be incompatible. That's the first reaction, because my background is coming from a generation and also a continent where capitalism in itself was not a good word. And so what was a policy of common good was not compatible with capitalism. Now, here I'm listening someone coming from the political class addressing this compatibility between capitalism and common good. So when you ask me about the dignified word, immediately come to my mind that we need to be clear about what a human being is. what is the perspective from which we are addressing the political regime or the political system. And so my sense after listening again the talk is that the system in which we are living today, highly competitive, highly focused on return, dominated by financial capitalism, in many ways is not making us, ourselves, the citizen, more human, rather than more dependent on certain economic system, which ultimately is not allowing us to be ourselves, to flourish. And so we are looking for, according to the speech, a more dignified capitalism, a capitalism that allow us not only to grow financially, but also as human person. Now, the question is whether this talk, Senator Rubio really made the case about that and showed the way by which we can start building this common good capitalism. That's the first impression that I have and my reaction to this word dignified work.
And Christopher, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think the problem with the speech as a whole is that there's really no definition of terms. Now, I understand this is not, we're not listening to a philosopher or a political scientist talking. We're listening to a senator, and it's in some ways a very political speech. But still, one get a sense of what is meant by the terms used. I mean, like for instance, the term capitalism. I think it would mean many different things to many different people. For instance, some people think of capitalism as the system of private wealth production via private possession of private property. Other people define it as the market. But, private property existed in pre-capitalist systems. There have always been markets, and indeed, even communist countries had markets. I mean, so the question is how do you define the term? And so, yeah, I mean, when I heard common good capitalism, my sense of capitalism is fairly negative. And so I think it just seems to me of the essence of capitalism that it can't possibly be modified by the term common good, because really what capitalism is ordered toward is the individual good. The question is that what Senator Rubio means when he means capitalism? And it's not entirely easy to say because, again, he doesn't actually say what he means. In terms of dignified work, I mean, if we take the historical example of capitalism, the question you would have to ask is from the time of the enclosures in England in the 18th century through the 19th century and the introduction of the factory system into our own time, has capitalism actually produced anything like what we really call dignified work, at least for members of the lower classes? I would think of dignified work as being work that's in accordance with the nature of man. Man is both a knower, possessing a free will, and a maker. So it's work for which a man can properly express what it means to be a man, and that's one level of it. And the second level is that he can properly provide for himself and for his family through the fruits of his labor. Those things together would be dignified work. And I think it's defensible, at least. I think it's almost undeniable that the history of capitalism is actually, unless it's modified by other influences, doesn't tend to produce that kind of dignified work, at least for people of the lower classes.
Right. Let me turn to a specific case, a specific example, and ask you both what you make of this. Because I'm what the current president would call a low-energy person, I always made it a point to have my classes early in the morning. Now why is that? Well, because I have low energy, the most energy I have is early in the morning, and then my overall energy deficit becomes more apparent. But because of that, I always had classes early in the day. And that meant starting off at 8 o'clock. And because of my low energy problem, I need time to prepare, even for the modest expressions of that modest energy. I would ordinarily get to work about, maybe 6:45. And who would be there? Well, one or two other teachers would be there sometimes, but mostly the people who would be there would be the maintenance people. And they'd be working pretty hard. And they'd always be friendly, and we'd always exchange a few jokes. And they'd be working hard. And when I came back for my first set of classes, they'd be leaving because they'd been working all night. And were they not to work, the buildings would be, not clean, not ordered. And over time, they wouldn't be very usable. Now, was the maintenance staff doing dignified work? What would you say?
Of course they do. But what is, I think, I got a little bit perplexed about the talk, is that on one point, Senator Rubio said the primary purpose of capitalism is to provide for human dignity. Now, when he says that phrase, I'm just thinking about another capitalism which is significantly different, which is they enhance, or their purpose is just to make profit. And so in the context of where he belongs, the Republican Party, I'm not sure that he is on the majority, because ultimately the idea of economics in perhaps the majority of people of the Republican Party supply side economics. So it's not quite compatible with the claim that he's making about human dignity provided by the system that he calls capitalism, which in itself, of course, need a better or a definition than what he's talking about. So in some ways, he's at the center of the mainstream within the Republican Party. That's my sense. So when you're talking about people who are working there before we get to class, of course, they are providing for themselves, and it's a dignified work. Given the circumstances, and also looking at what the institution really is providing to them. So we need to take a look at that. And so, but my emphasis here is precisely whether or not that system that is called capitalism is able to provide for human dignity. And even the market, what do we mean by market? That, I think, something that we need to discuss better.
All right. Christopher?
Well, in terms of whether the employees are doing dignified work, the nature of the work, the character of the work, it's serving a common good. I would like to know what they're paid and what their benefits are, because that, I think, goes into whether overall the work they're doing is dignified. You might be doing something good.
So the work of physical labor in service of a given community is dignified in terms of the kind of work.
Exactly.
And it ought to be recognized, the dignity ought to be recognized by proper salary, proper benefits.
Right, basically they're parts in the common good, at least the material common good. That's the only way they can achieve it. So they have to be properly remunerated. If they're not being treated like human beings. They're being treated as almost the level of beasts. So
even if it was work worth doing.
Right.
Now, at the university, one of the more popular schools in the university was the School of Business. And in the School of Business, there were any number of majors that a person could follow. And one of them was marketing. Now, suppose you're a marketing major and you get a job in marketing, and let's say you are marketing not widgets, because the widget demand isn't what it used to be. I'm not even sure I've ever seen a widget. But suppose what you're doing is marketing a whole range of products, consumer products, and you help to market them, let's say, by writing ads. If you open a paper or if you turn on the television, there'll be ads. If you drive down the roads in Los Angeles, there are ads everywhere. Is writing ads for products that, say, you yourself wouldn't buy, and you don't see really the need for those products, let's say they're largely ornamental or largely matters of taste satisfaction, the 432 kinds of beer, the 932,000 types of perfume, the 7,027 types of garage doors. Is that dignified work?
Well, I think it depends a lot on. I think, given the context of our economy, marketing is necessary so that people at least know that certain products are out there. Now, certain products are rather useless, and other products are not so useless. And it's a benefit if you have a useful product to let people know it's there. Now, obviously, you can let people know a product's there without using underhanded seduction or lying. And there's a good deal of that, I fear, in ad writing.
Could there be a useful production list? Every community puts together a useful production list, makes it available at several locations. How would that work?
Yeah, that would be. I think that would be preferable. But the thing is that lacking that, I think one can write ads in a dignified manner by using a kind of form of rhetoric to get people to know a product's there and to know that it's a good product. And certain products might even be beneficial for people. So it's not. I don't think it would be wrong to use rhetoric, rhetorical devices in order to excite one's interest in that. But much of ad writing is not that way. Much of it is mere seduction, and it's an attempt to get people to buy things they don't need, never really wanted before, and to convince them that they need them and want them, when no possible human being ever could.
How essential to capitalism is the development of artificial needs in order to expand markets? Is that built right into capitalism as we experience it?
I think so. I think it's Senator Rubio talks about the right to profit. He does, again, it's a term profit he doesn't define. But profit in capitalism seems to be an endless increase in one's return on one's investment. And so the ideal is to make as much money off of a product as you possibly can without consideration of what anything like a just price or human need or anything else. So, that's the case, everybody wants to make as much money as he possibly can. You need to have modes of seduction to get people to buy useless stuff. Generally useless stuff that's manufactured very poorly, so that there's very little that goes into the cost of the materials, and then relies upon paying workers very, very little, and outsourcing and the like. So I think, given the necessity of the profit motive, in the sense I've defined it, this form of advertising is absolutely necessary.
How about this? Mario, maybe you could take a crack at this kind of question. Suppose somebody says, well, dignity is an elusive concept, and maybe the way to identify dignified work is to consider what kind of work people really want to do. And in terms of worker preference, there's a lot of indicators that what people really want to do is anything that will get them a good salary. And once they get the job that gets them a good salary, the way they'd like to do that job is to do it as little as possible and to have as high a salary as possible. And that's just the law of supply and demand extended to people's job preferences. And so rather than talking about dignity and philosophy and so forth, why don't we just talk about what people would like to do? And, well, gee, when you're talking to college students, one of the things you do is say, well, the job market in such and such an area is very strong. And usually if enough people say that the job market is very, very strong, a lot of people decide to shift and get into that area. And, well, it's up to them. They vote with their feet as to what counts as dignified work.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very interesting point. But when you talk about dignified world, we refer to dignity. What I always say is that corresponds to my own humanity. In other words, imagine you are going to get a job as a philosopher, and you see that the market is open for people who dedicate themselves to, let's say, just for the sake of the argument, I don't know, linguistic analysis or something of that sort, for which I'm not good at, but there's open the market for that. If I go there just because I will get more, a higher salary or a job, yes, I could do that, but intimately I will be betraying my own humanity or my own calling, if you will. So the question is how long I'm going to be there in order really to be, I'm going to use the word happy or with certain joy. That is a question that we need to raise. To what extent that job, even though it's paying me the salary, is going to make me satisfied with what I am myself. So if that a tangible good is something that's measurable in terms of money or salary, I think probably not. So perhaps here is something that is deeper about this assertion of common good capitalism is what I would say the invisible connection that we have between culture and economics. In other words, we need to take a look deeply into what we are as human beings, what makes us really flourish. And I don't think that is a mere subjective way of understanding ourselves. There is a humanity that we share. And even though we may have different callings, there is something that we are happy to do. It's not just about my job, it's about my vocation. And when you talk about these to students, even when they are looking at the market, where they can get more money, et cetera, ultimately they know intimately that even though they may get that job and get more money, that may not make them to be happy. So the question is to discuss what kind of societal proposal we need to make. Is that just a proposal guided by the law of competitions and how we can make a better way of living in terms of money? or there should be something else? I think that is the question that I would ask myself, and I ask actually my students.
Could we say that in the end, an integral dimension of dignified work is that the work contributes to the common good? And if, in fact, over a period of time, a person engages in a work that doesn't contribute to the common good, ordinarily the person is going to find what he or she does meaningless, really meaningless, and suffer on that account. There's this back and forth, the transitive and the intransitive dimension of an action. Let's say you have the action of spending a lot of time every day emptying bedpans. Well, that meets the immediate needs of a lot of people, and they're real immediate. And if you have that immediate need, nothing is quite so pressing as that immediate need. And if somebody helps you by emptying the bedpan, well, that's a work that contributes to the common good. And a person who does that work has no reason to think that it's meaningless work. It really makes a contribution. Whereas, of course, if you're assisting in the toilet of someone who could perfectly well take care of his own toileting, well, that's another matter altogether. Would that be right? Any work is dignified work if it is freely chosen and contributes to the common good. An analogy, it's a little bit like poetry. You have a lot of poems that are about sylvan landscapes and dewy-covered mountains and grass and so forth. But you could have a very, very good poem about a garbage can. Would that be right?
Christopher?
Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of poems about garbage cans in the 20th century. But yeah, I take your point. I mean, much of modern poetry, though generally modern poetry addresses these things, it does in a disparaging way or as a signs of despair. But I think you're right. I think the central piece of dignified work is whether this work fulfills the common good or not. And if it does, it's going to have a twofold character. It's going to be useful and important to society, and it's also going to exercise to some extent the individual's human nature. So that it's going to, in other words, it's not simply going to be a beast of burden work. It's going to be something where a person can exercise their the intellect and their sense of art. Now, if all you do is empty bedpans, it's kind of hard to see how that really fulfills that function. But generally, people don't. There's a whole aspect of caring that goes in to caring for others, and that requires certain kinds of talent, certain kinds of turns of mind, and certain kinds of genius, if you will, in order to do that properly. I think Mario's point is very well taken, and it's something I've seen in my own children, is that I have children who, one's a violinist, I have a daughter who teaches and writes, and then I have one of my sons, quite differently, wants to become a diesel mechanic. All these they tend to gravitate towards these certain jobs because it sort of expresses something within themselves, that the kind of interior genius they have for certain things. And I think that is that contributes to the dignity of work, and it also contributes to one's happiness in work. Some people, I often thought I would hate to work in the medical field because I just don't like to think about the interior of human bodies. I just don't find the whole thing pleasant.
Well, you could be a dermatologist.
Yeah, that's... I hadn't thought of that. Thanks for bringing that up. But, so people do, there's a sense where people you have to address each person's interest and each person's, for lack of a better term, genius, in order to help them understand what they should do. I think a lot of cases, we've seen just my own experience, a lot of cases, young people do want to go into jobs that they are interested in and enjoy. And especially in our economy now, it's often the parents who are dissuading them from doing this, because the parents are worried, and for good reason, that their children might not be able to support themselves or be able to support a family. And so what they do is they push them towards professions which seem, or at least for the moment, lucrative. And
yes. Well, lots of philosophical and theological questions converge on work, and I think of Opus Dei, the organization, and the spirituality of Opus Dei is oftentimes thought to be a lay-focused spirituality, and there's a great deal of discussion about work and the value of work. How about if we turn to another, contested concept that's in Senator Rubio's speech, American exceptionalism. He says he believes in it. But what is it?
So I have, before going into that, I had just a comment, which is I think I have been observing over the past month in the development of some political event in Latin America. Latin America in this moment is really going through as many crises in every country, which somehow they are similar in the way that people react, people are protesting. But what I want to focus is mainly on Chile. Chile, which was as we know, a major country, if you will, that gave birth to the Christian Democratic movement in the 1960s to the extent that was an example for even European counterparts. But and over the past 20 years, 25 years after the fall of the dictatorship, Chile has grown in such a way that he was at least to becoming a first world country. And the GDP really has been fantastic over the past 5 years, growing almost 3 to 5% every year, and so on. So a lot of economic indicator, make Chile almost a first world country. When you go there, and I have been there more than once, and you see how flourishing that society was, at least materially speaking. And yet, after a month or so, if you see the videos and the news and everything that come from Chile, is in a profound crisis where people are burning down supermarkets, stores, hospital, you name it. There's no exception about what people are just burning. I use this word with very appropriate application. So, in other words, they are destroying the capital and many other cities around the country. So it's a profound crisis. To the extent that the president is fearful about what is happening, is calling to the population to a new constitutional convention and to have a new constitution. So, which I don't think is going to solve any problem. But what is my point? When you see and observing the immediate causes, you can relate and you can say, well, there is a conspiracy of the left coming from Venezuela and all that. That may be, in some cases, the case. But I don't think that explains all. I do believe that there is a crisis, following maritime terms, of civilization there. And I think the overall point is this. There is a profound insatisfaction among those who are protesting about the economic system. It seems that they don't know what they want, but they don't want the system to be exclusively a financial system, an economic system. And so in this kind of despair, they are burning everything irrationally. But ultimately, it's a lack of meaning of what they want. But it seems that they are reacting that this is not what they want. In other words, they don't want just society built on what? Built on economic efficiency. And so I think this is very illustrative and very educational in what we are talking about. In other words, this society built on free market supply side economics did not really build the common good. And I'm talking about Chile, where in the 1960s there were explicit understanding of the common good. There was a political party, but after 25 years, in 1990, that began a different kind of approach to economics, which, yes, was efficient, yes, spurred economic growth, shareholder primacy, you name it. But ultimately, it seems did not deliver what the people, the citizenry wanted, which is some kind, and I'm going to use now, dignified work. And that led to this irrational way of trying to solve this situation that I don't think are the proper, the good way of solving that, but just, I think it's a very human reaction to that. It's just my comment to this situation.
Do you suppose that there's a sense in Chile that the economy isn't so much in the service of the people as it is a financial vehicle with a reason for being that is within itself? Let's see how much we can produce in terms of money. And what's the economy all about? It's about the production of money. And does it matter who has the money? Not so much. What matters is that there's more money. One of the things that Rubio says is that in recent decades, the economy in the United States has become more and more a financial vehicle, and he even cites Pope Benedict's use of that term, financial vehicle. Would that be applicable in Chile?
Right. Of course, that's applicable. When you see the rage, that's the word, the rage of young people who seem to be doing fairly well, destroying certain machinery of workers, which are building beautiful buildings and destroying everything just for the sake of destroying it. It seems that unconsciously they are rejecting a way of dealing with reality, economic reality, which is not satisfying their heart. Now, we may say also, well, perhaps their nihilism comes from someplace else, the lack of meaning. But what I'm saying is that also the sense of the society in which you live and what that society value give a lot of understanding about your place in the world. And there's a lot of insatisfaction. So ultimately, what, again, referring to what is happening, well, the president called a new constitution. So the question is the rule of law or the constitution of the major rule of law that we need to organize, how we organize society. This is going to solve all the issues, or there is something else there that we need to address. But that shows a little bit about how we have lost the sense of what is the good and what is the common good, and how the economic system, political system should be established in order for us to flourish as a human person, not just financially. And I think it's very telling, very educational.
In this struggle in Chile, and there's a enormous struggle going on in Argentina right now as well, would anybody ever say there's such a thing as Chilean exceptionalism, which we have to recognize and honor?
Yes.
Or would anybody ever say there's an Argentinian exceptionalism?
No. That's a good point. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but that's excellent point. Up to 2 months ago, any commentator and any good columnist, observer of the Latin American political scene always emphasize, stress his or her admiration for Chile. And Chile is an exceptional country. Chile have achieved development. Chile is sustainable. Chile is getting very close to the first world. Chile, in other words, all the praises go to Chile, and we need to follow his way open to the world, the free market, the sense of globalization. Everything was Chile. That was the gold standard. And so now nobody said about Argentina or any other country. Chile was the model. Now, this crisis just show that the gold standard was not such. So there was something underneath there that we didn't really grasp. Now, what I think is over the past 20 years, or between 75 and 1995, there was an undermined process of secularization, which get the country empty of a culture that used to be the culture that sustained Christian democracy. And so the country was sustained only by financial efficiency. And so we were somehow perceiving something which was not really there. And now everything is falling apart. And that is somehow being multiplied or somehow imitated by other countries. And when you go to any newspaper in Latin America, you see that there are similarities in this reaction. So, but again, yes, was an exceptional country in that regard.
All right. Christopher, what about you? American exceptionalism.
Well, I think...
what is it? Should we accept it? Should we be surprised that perhaps people in Chile at one point were emphasizing Chilean exceptionalism?
Well, I wonder if in Chile they meant the same thing by it at all. To say, or in Latin America about Chile, to say that Chile is exceptional because it's followed a certain model and it's prosperous is almost accidental to Chile in a way. One can imagine Chile not following that model, not being prosperous, and still being Chile. I think American exceptionalism is something very different. I think it's a sense almost that the United States has a transcendent destiny or a transcendent mission, sort of a preternatural destiny that other nations don't possess. You know, it's reflected in terms like the only indispensable nation, the city on the hill, the last best hope of mankind.
Shining city on a hill.
Yes. And, excuse me, please. I remember even one Catholic speaker when I was in college years ago calling the United States the New Jerusalem. So there's a sense that there's a kind of political salvation that emanates from the United States in a way that emanates from no other country. And almost that I think the popular American mind, at least until very recently, there's almost a sense that the United States is indefectible. I remember phrases when I was young, we will get out of this crisis. Why? Because we're America. It's just sort of like...
That's who we are.
Yeah, we get out of crisis. We have crises. We have downturns, but we always work ourselves out. Why? Because we're America. And part of it is Chesterton, I think, really captured this when he said in his book, What I Saw in America, which incidentally I think is a wonderful, very interesting book, an important book to read to understand, especially from an English perspective, what American exceptionalism is. He said, the United States is the only country which is founded upon a creed. I think that's something to really think about. It's the only country that was founded upon a creed. So you have all these different elements. It's almost that there's a kind of sense that America has a unique destiny. It's the last best hope of man. It has a certain indefectibility, and it has has a set of ideals upon which it's based. Being American is not so much being from Ohio or California or any other place. Being an American is to hold to certain fundamental ideals. I think that's the way, when I think of American exceptionalism, that's what I think it is.
And would you accept it?
No.
But Mario does. Senator Marco, blimey, mates. Marco Rubio does accept it. Not going to apologize for it. What's going on here?
Well, he's a politician, and he's good. You can't be a politician and come up and say, "Look, we're just like any other country. We're not number one. We're a nation. We should love our nation, but we're just another nation." That you don't win votes and support the United States by saying that. You have to embrace the narrative. So I don't doubt that he probably does deeply believe in himself, but that's also part of, I think, the factor that you have to remember, to keep in mind when listening to this kind of talk.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, please.
Yes, but the idea of exceptionalism as is defined in America, we are founded here by a creed. On certain principles on creed, and so we are setting on principle of republicanism and all that. And so we begin from scratch and create a new world. That is quite different from how other nations, if you go to any Latin American country, the founding or the independent movement did not set up an exceptional nation from the beginning, because even though they desired to do that, it is because the heritage, the culture, the tradition were so strong that always any founding fathers, or what we call the libertadores of Latin America, always have to deal with two ambivalent options. Either go with the Republican ideals, which we were in Latin America were inherited from France mainly, or even some from the utilitarian in Britain, or with the counter-Reformation ideals or culture was coming still from Spain. And so they tried somehow to compromise and form a blend of ideals, which was not completely new, were not Republican ideals, but also Republican ideals just mixed with some more conservative or Reformation, we say Baroque culture. So from the beginning, they were not exceptional in this sense. That's not unique. And so there was a struggle. You can see even civil wars in 19th century, in 20th century in Latin America, were not able to reconcile these two extremes. Almost impossible until, and that is why I call the exceptionality in Chile, in 1940s, there were some, I think, extraordinary statements like Eduardo Frei, who is the first one who started talking about the primacy of spirit in politics. And he tried to reconcile both, and reconcile both through the Christian Democratic movement first, and then the Christian Democratic Party, which somehow tried to balance what Latin America inherited from the Republican ideals with certain content or culture, which was the Spanish Baroque culture. In that sense, was unique, was an example, followed later by other countries like Venezuela, but not many. And so, in that sense, it's a little bit different because I think the strength of the heritage Spain was much higher. I believe that what America inherited from Europe, from Britain. So, and when we talk about the growth and the dynamic of the Chilean economy, I think it's explained that this country, somehow the institution created in the 1940s and so on, lasted until now, even though the underneath or the source were somehow forgotten because of the secularization. And I'm talking about this sense is exceptional. In other words, I always said this phrase in my classes. Chile was able, through the democratic movement, to cure or heal the schizophrenia in Latin America. Schizophrenia means try to somehow heal the profound division between what we may call populism or the Hispanic culture and the ideal of Republican ideal, which were coming from what we call the French Revolution.
And Eduardo Frei, whom you've mentioned, was intellectually very close to Jacques Maritain. Right.
Yes, and you can read it's very pleasant reading some Jacques Maritain letter to Frei, an exchange letter after Frei left office. And they talk about the common good, they talk about politics and religious faith, and it's very, very educational. Now, I'm not suggesting that Frei was achieve everything in life. He felt that was his failure. But what I'm saying, the attempt to reconcile these ideals in a very balanced way, I think is worthwhile of at least taking a second look. Particularly now where the extremes are so profound and the rivalry are really leading many countries in what I would call a class struggle, which is completely unhealthy for a republic.
Let me give just a little bit more background on this term, American exceptionalism. Digging around, it turns out that phrase, American exceptionalism, was not, in fact, something that the Pilgrims put together, not, in fact, something that comes from the founders of the United States. It's not something that comes from Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote about, we might call it the American genius, thinking that the American genius might offer other countries something that would help them with the development of democracy. But this almost sounds like a conspiracy plot, but it looks like it's true from digging around. The actual term, American exceptionalism, was made popular by Joseph Stalin. Now, explanation for this jaw-dropping history search. At one point in the United States, a faction of American communists said that America was exceptional and you really couldn't expect any socialist revolution here. It would have to take place other places because America's economy and institutions were such that it simply did not give rise to the kind of class divisions that there were in other places. And so you could be an American communist, but don't think that there's going to be an evolution of a communist party in America. You have to look for the evolution of communism in other countries, and in America is, well, just exceptional. And Stalin was not at all happy with that and coined the term American exceptionalism. And then, kind of further irony, there is something called Americanism, which was dismissed as a heresy on the part of the Holy Father at the time, and I'm not sure whether that, I don't think it was Leo the 13th. I think it was one pope later, but I'm not at all sure. Was it Leo?
Yeah, it was Leo.
It was Leo, all right. You know, I'm rambling here, but that's kind of fun. When the little flower, St. Teresa of Lisieux, met Leo the 13th, I think he was already 93, and she said to one of her traveling companions after having met him, "I didn't know anyone could be so old." Leo the 13th was around for a lot of events. Well, at any rate, it was called Americanism, and it was the idea that the church in America really was exceptional, and all this nonsense going on in Europe really didn't have much to do with the church in America. So American exceptionalism, like many other terms, has had a somewhat elastic and surprising history, which is all the more reason, and I notice that Christopher regularly does this, all the more reason why we have to pin down these concepts, especially if they're being used widely. As always, we're coming close to the end of our allotted hour, but I want to do one more discussion point. There have been many critics, of course, of Marco Rubio's speech from the side of people who are capitalists in the rough, ready, savage sense of capitalism today. And one is worth noting. A fellow at National Review has argued that it's capitalism, and for this capitalism must be given due credit. It's capitalism that provided the necessary stimulus for the Industrial Revolution, and it's capitalism that provided the necessary stimulus for all the scientific advances of the last 200 years. Take away a capitalist economy, you don't have the Industrial Revolution. Take away a capitalist economy, you don't have the scientific advances of the last couple of centuries that have so transformed the daily lives of Americans and Europeans. Compare and contrast. Was there an industrial revolution in the Arab world? No. Has the Arab world contributed in any significant way to the scientific advances of the last 200 years? No. So be very careful about what you criticize, because if you're looking at common good in a broad sense, you'll include all the benefits of the Industrial Revolution and all the benefits of contemporary science, and take away capitalism and you don't have them. Response to that criticism?
Yeah, I think that I mean, it's extremely simplistic, and there's a lot of things that went into, for instance, the scientific revolution, and it wasn't because of capitalism. Granted, capitalism used certain of the developments of the Industrial Revolution. Maybe some of them were produced in order to be used in industry, but it's not. It doesn't seem to be necessary that one has to have what they call the unregulated market. That's what we mean by capitalism in order for these things to exist. In fact, the market has never really been unregulated, and many of the scientific discoveries we have been done through partnership between business and government. So, I mean, I think that's extremely simplistic, but one could also add we wouldn't have had industrialism. That's true if the Parliament had not followed the behests of the wealthy in England and enclosed the commons for the villages and drove countless numbers of people into the cities to live in poverty and die young and have rather wretched lives. We wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution if it hadn't been for a number of such acts in the history of the world. You can look at the history of the United States in terms of population displacement, which actually did occur. Yeah, all those things happen because of those causes, but does that make the thing itself, dispossessing people, a good thing and something we should actually embrace? So you have to look at the thing itself and see, and to what degree has capitalism actually added to the common good, except maybe certain material benefits, which were arguably extended to much of the population through non-capitalist means. In terms of culture, has capitalism advanced culture? In terms of family stability, has it advanced that? Has it advanced religion? Has it advanced virtue? So those are all the things one has to discuss when discussing this question as to what role capitalism had. And the question is it possible? Is it possible that it could be done other ways? And has it been done other ways?
Because there is indeed an indivisible tie between culture and economics. So
right.
any one economic model might be part of an explanation, but it's certainly not the whole of an explanation.
Right. And if I may just add, is that when one looks at, when people, the defenders of capitalism, like to talk about the free market, the untrammeled market, without realizing that, for instance, like take the enclosures in England, that would not have occurred without the action of Parliament. And in many cases, large business, or the people who are the capitalist class, allies itself with government to suppress other movements or to create advantages for themselves. When has this untrammeled market ever existed? And you can't claim the benefits of an untrammeled market when when the government power has been used for the benefit of the wealthy.
Important point. Mario, final thoughts?
Well, I completely agree with what Christopher is saying. It's a very simplistic way of understanding history. Even the meaning of history, it's like saying, some people argue that, Latin America is authoritarian because the first act of the founding father was establish a strong government and suppress freedom, because otherwise the Hispanic or the Spanish Empire would come back. So then you suppress for a while, so you make stable the system, and then rebuild freedom. And that is the best way to govern many countries. And still this idea is there, so that many people claim, particularly populists claim, that we need a strong government in order to suppress a little bit of freedom so that the society can flourish. So Latin America has the possibility of establishing what we call a free republic in that sense, because ultimately it's fall apart. I think this is a fallacy because we don't have any proof in retrospect what may have happened if from the beginning the founding father established what we may call a creed, or respect freedoms, and so start building through a process a different type of political regime. So we don't have, in retrospect, this example. And so, and also in this case, we perhaps need to very, very specific about what we mean by capitalism as well, because among capitalists, they differ from one perspective to another. See, some people are more in-reign capitalists, other people may be niches capitalism. Which one is it? And so I think in that sense, it's very, very simplistic.
I would only add that if we were to look at scholarly works on the history of science, say, in the West from 1600, those works on the history of science would not be including statements like, of course, we scientists owe it all to capitalism. Scientists have a very different view of how they have come to achieve their successes, and it doesn't have to do with capitalism.
Yeah.
Well, we're
Yes,
go ahead.
I just want to say, I don't think the conservatives need to worry too much about Marco Rubio. From what I was able to gather from his speech, though, he seems to be in via towards the promised land. I think he's still quite far, and he wants everything to be rooted simply in kind of encouraging models of government action. So I don't think he's going to be undermining the free market system as they understand it anytime soon, or even proposing to.
No. Well, we're at an end, and as always, having begun with a prayer, we want to end in prayer. And as we ordinarily do, I'm going to take today's gospel. It's from Luke. Jesus entered the temple area and proceeded to drive out those who were selling things, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." And every day he was teaching in the temple area. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people, meanwhile, were seeking to put him to death, but they could find no way to accomplish their purpose because all the people were hanging on his words. The Gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.